It's being aware, being in tune with what's going on with your finances.
If you love your spouse, you have to be able to have the respect to have this uncomfortable conversation.
9 times out of 10, the goals change completely when the other spouse is in the room.
I've been learning about financial literacy for the first time in my life. My husband has always made our financial decisions.
And if he dies or we got a divorce, I will feel like I was starting from scratch.
What can I do to protect myself in a worst case scenario? Is a postnup a good option?
In my experience, there's always one driver in the relationship, whether it's husband or spouse or whoever. There's always one driver, one passenger. It's my duty to make sure the passenger in the relationship understands why we're doing what we're doing. I don't need them to know down into the weeds, but the question is, do you feel safe? Do you feel secure? Do you know where to get the answer?
I think it's a wide variety to go from I need to be more financially literate to I may need a postnup.
When I talk with clients, I really encourage both spouses to be in the meeting.
I think it is a huge disservice to society that there are so many people who are not financially literate. And in couples, actually, this is one thing that one or the other just surrenders to the other one. So it's not necessarily a situation where one just wants to hog all the answers. It's just one is more interested than the other.
We've got a daughter. She's 15. It's absolutely appropriate. It's absolutely necessary for her to be able to stand on her own. You are responsible for nobody except yourself. Do not look to anybody to solve your problems. Do not look to anybody to answer all these questions that you may have. You are responsible for you.
Historically, wives outlive their husbands. So effectively, it's her plan that he's along for the ride. And I try and have that conversation on the front end because I go, this may be the reality. If it's a divorce, it may be a different situation. If the assets are substantial, maybe it is a postnup. If you're that worried, that's a conversation to have. It's not a fun conversation to have, but it may be a realistic conversation to have. So if you and your spouse are on that point on you feel like you've given up control, having a third party be the bad guy in the room on your behalf helps.
Unfortunately, no matter how quote unquote progressive we may be, sometimes in heterosexual couples, we tend to fall into these stereotypical roles, right? And I think that's what it is. If the woman is more keen to taking care of the household, they just may not have the bandwidth actually at that time to take care of the finances or the bills. So then those just fall in that. Be in the meetings, ask the questions, get educated, because divorces do happen, deaths do happen, and especially deaths that are not when we are old and gray, they also do happen. So making sure that you're having those conversations with the partner who is making those financial decisions and having them consistently, poking holes into their strategies is gonna be the best thing for the both of you. It's gonna make that financial plan a lot better.
If you are working with professional advisors, accountants, attorneys, financial planners, introduce the spouse to that person, because you don't want that introduction to be happening when possibly one of the worst things in your life has already occurred.
Making sure that you have one folder, one flash drive, one something saved somewhere with all of the password, where all of the accounts are that the other person can get to quickly in case of either a divorce or a death.
I have something that I call an Andy's Dead letter. It's a letter that I have sealed in my office. There's the date on the outside. My wife knows where it is. So if something happens to me, she knows to open it up, and it has a whole bunch of information in it. Now, she is aware of everything, and I'm not hiding anything from her, but this is just kind of the starting point for her to be able to recreate things when I'm no longer around. So what does it have in it? It has names of accountants and attorneys. It has names of our bankers. It has names of insurance agents. It has account numbers, telephone numbers. I have a password manager on my computer at home, and so it has a really long password, and you type that in, and then it has the passwords for everything else. It's not a legal document, right? But it helps kind of organize all of these thoughts so that whoever the survivor is, they can start to recreate the business of the family after that.
I'm always impressed when I sit down with somebody and I make some assumptions, right? There's a person who's the driver and they tell me all these things, and I realize the other person knows this all. They've just kind of said, they like doing it. I'll let them do it. I understand it. They like it. I don't, right? And so really having that conversation and learning their story, learning their background, why they chose not to do that piece of the dynamic in the household. Not because they didn't have the skill set. It was like the other person enjoyed it more. It just was boring to me. I understand it fully, Jason. I don't need as much coaching as you think.
I tell this to clients all the time who, maybe it's the male spouse who reaches out to me to set up the meeting. I'm gonna have those initial meetings with your wife. I will not meet with you alone. I may do a phone call with you alone, and then if you show up in my office after my directions and we do the initial conversations, I am going to make sure that the female spouse is present for the planning conversations. And 9 times out of 10, the goals change completely when the other spouse is in the room.
The most prepared people are the ones who face their own mortality.
It comes down to respect. If you love your spouse, you have to be able to have the respect to have this uncomfortable conversation, because if you have one person who does not feel financially literate, make them better. That's what this is. It's a team, right? And it may involve lawyers. It may involve this. If that's gonna make your spouse feel better, feel comfortable, it will be money well spent.
Even if you are bored by these financial conversations, make sure that you have maybe a quarterly cadence where you both sit at the table and the partner who's more in tune with the finances just gives a quick report to the one who is not.
It's a matter of running to the problem. Don't think that these questions are going to be answered if you don't ask them. So figure out what's going on, figure out what might be appropriate for your particular situation, and then kind of put that plan into place.
I recently got divorced, and I'll have to start paying alimony to my ex-spouse.
How will this affect my financial plan? I'm almost 58 and planning to retire at 65.
Will I have to split my 401k with my spouse? It depends on what your spouse has. It depends on the quadro, which is the divorce agreement that oversees retirement accounts. You may not. It depends on, again, the split of assets that was determined by your divorce agreement.
You may not be able to retire at 65. This may be a barrier that you do have to plan to work longer. This is the reality of divorce. You're splitting assets. You may or may not have to split your 401k.
Financially, and I won't even talk about emotionally, divorce financially can be catastrophic, right? We are faced with a situation where in many circumstances, you are required to split your retirement accounts with your spouse. Whether it's 50-50 or some different ratio, that is what we typically see. You may be required to give your spouse part of your pension if you're eligible for one.
My kind of financial analogy for divorce is the reset. You're going from 2 people in a household paying for expenses to now 1 income household paying for expenses. So it's just more. You're spending more money on your mortgage, you're spending more money on your property taxes if you have them, et cetera. So it is, it can be expensive right off the bat to have that kind of lifestyle change. And of course, your assets might be split in half, right? So if your bank account, maybe your 401k, again, it depends on the entire family's financial situation as to how that's all gonna get split up. But it has a pretty significant impact on your financial plan. So I would say what you need to do, and what I have advised my clients in the past who've gotten divorced, is first and foremost, sit down and either, if you haven't already, work with a mediator, with your ex-spouse or with your soon-to-be ex-spouse, maybe a financial mediator, to figure out how those expenses are gonna work. If you have children together, you wanna figure out who's gonna cover what expenses and how that's all gonna work out in a way that, is not acrimonious. So it is important. There are resources that you have that can help you to work through all of that.
Money and emotion go hand in hand. Let's have a cooling off period, right? Let's try to avoid trying to replicate the old life you used to have. Maybe you're renting for a little while. Let's think it through. Let's find, if you haven't been in the workforce before, what were you doing before? Can you go back to that work? Did you like that work? How do we start to set you up for success with what this spousal support may allow you to do, because it may not be on the books forever. So this is the same time to reinvent yourself and find your way so you're going to be self-sufficient on your own with whatever the assets you have from the marriage.
I think there's a lot of emotion tied up in getting divorced, and also, being tied to sort of wanting to hang on to some of those things that you're used to. And that's normal, and that's completely natural. But when it comes to your financial planning, you now have to have a reset. You kind of have to have this, start over button here and say, okay, this is what I have, and these are my goals. What do I need to adjust, right? It may mean you have to save more. It may mean you have to spend less. It may mean you have to work a little bit longer to make all of those things happen. But now you're planning around what your goals are, not your joint goals as a couple, but what your goals are.
There are a lot of things that you need to be thinking about, right? I know one of the first questions that comes to mind, or first things that people think about, is whether or not they can stay in their home. That is a very challenging one, because for either spouse to be able to afford the home, they need to be able to afford the mortgage on their own, taxes, insurance, maintenance, upkeep, and quite frankly, it's not possible in many circumstances.
That may feel like the best thing to do emotionally, but is that the best thing for you to do financially? Is it something that you're then going to be struggling to be able to make ends meet because you're now trying to pay on one salary for a house that you afforded previously on 2 salaries?
You'll have one person who controls so much on money, about saving, on credit card uses, on whatever, that they really didn't see the warning signs that they were basically financially abusive in a sorts, right? That they were not having a genuine conversation. It was, I'm doing this because I want to do this, without really engaging the other person. And I think that's the power of a financial advisor, really having that conversation, being able to try and engage both members, I think helps alleviate some of that. But in my experience, it is sometimes, outside of extramarital things, when it comes to money, it is not enough information, not enough communication.
What I see, or what I have seen in terms of the dynamic around money and what about that might be contributing to people either having disagreements about money and their goals in life, or even potentially divorce or separation, is a lot of time it's spending habits, it's potentially goals, and also what we call financial infidelity, which is maybe one person in the couple who is running up debt, or is gambling, or is doing something that they're hiding from their spouse or partner that impacts both of them from a financial perspective.
Many people make decisions in a silo, right? You make a one-off decision on its own. So if your spouse says, I'm looking at this SUV, it's gonna cost $700 a month, you might think it's okay. But if you just had a meeting with your spouse a couple weeks earlier and you said, well, gosh, I noticed our savings account is no longer where it used to be. I'm not sure if I feel comfortable with us picking up a car payment right now. Why don't we wait for a little bit? Or maybe we should look for something that's a little bit more affordable than the one that you're looking at, right? It's being aware, being in tune with what's going on with your finances.
Try to have as best of a civil conversation as you can to go, you created this wealth together. Let's find a happy medium when you don't have it together. And when there's kids involved, it's try to have as little disruption as you can, because effectively your kids will feel the stings if you are trying to hide, not have money to your spouse who may be caring for the kids. So having that delicate balance of, it's not easy. You're trying to make someone whole from a life you built together.
Again, you're gonna have to start from scratch here and thinking about, okay, I got what I got, and I'm planning around XYZ goals, and work with your financial planner to build all of that out and to help you think about what are the changes you need to make now to maybe play catch up, or maybe it's just to reposition yourself so your investments are working now for you based on your goals, since those goals might be different than when you were in a couple.
What's their lifestyle gonna look like going forward? What's their future income gonna look like? What are the expenses gonna look like? Are you gonna have to make modifications to your lifestyle? For many people, they do have to make adjustments to their lifestyle. Whatever that might be, you might have to drive a different type of car. You might, be a member somewhere at some club or participate in different things that, quite frankly, you might not be able to afford anymore. And so you do need to take a step back and figure out where you stand financially.
Talking about money is hard. And you know that if you sit down with your spouse or your partner and you're like, okay, we're gonna have the money conversation, it's emotional. You know, I have a really close friend in my neighborhood who literally cries every time her husband says, we've got to talk about money. She's like, I can't do it. It's so stressful. I don't want to talk to him about it. You know, we're going to argue. And they never argue. It's always a totally fine conversation, but she has a lot of stress and anxiety about it. She doesn't want to talk about it. And you have to talk about it. You got to have it all out on the table.